First thing I noticed wasn't the house, it was her hands. She was crouched on the front porch, scrubbing the stone steps with a brush, and I watched her from behind the wheel of my rental car for almost a full minute before I understood what I was seeing. My daughter, 62 pounds lighter than the last time I held her. Her hair pulled back in a knot so tight it looked like it hurt. Wearing a gray cotton top I'd never seen before, faded at the elbows. Scrubbing my house like she was trying to erase herself from it. I had driven 11 hours from Vancouver. I'd been on a plane before that, flying back from a 2-week work trip to Edinburgh that turned into 3 months. And then, the way these things happen when you're building something, into 12 years. I had called. I had sent money every month without fail. I had sent gifts for her birthday in April and cards for Christmas. But I had not come home. Not until now. I sat in that car, and I did not move. She didn't look up. I want to be honest about something before I tell you the rest of this. I was not a perfect mother. I left when she was 22 because I thought she was grown. I thought she was settled. She had the house, which was mine, paid off, worth just over $2 million in a quiet suburb of Calgary. She had a husband I had met twice and liked well enough. She had a job she enjoyed, working at a dental office near the university. I told myself she had everything she needed. What I didn't know was that by the time I'd been gone 18 months, she had lost most of it. Not all at once. Slowly, the way water finds a crack in a wall and works its way through. I didn't know any of that yet, sitting in the driveway. All I knew was that my daughter was scrubbing the porch of the home I'd left her, and she was doing it like someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to stalk. I got out of the car. She heard the door and stood up slowly, and when she turned around and saw me, she didn't run. She didn't cry. She just went very still, the way a person goes still when they're afraid that whatever they're looking at might disappear if they move too fast. "Mum," she said. That was all. Her name is Tessa. She was 34 years old. She looked 50. I need to back up. I need to tell you how I ended up in Edinburgh in the first place because it matters. I am a landscape architect. I spent 20 years building a practice in Calgary, mostly commercial work, parks, municipal green spaces, the kind of projects that take years and pay reasonably well if you're patient. In 2011, a firm in Scotland reached out about a large public commission outside Edinburgh, a heritage park restoration on a property attached to a historic estate. They wanted a Canadian perspective, they said. They'd seen my work. I was 60 years old. My husband had passed 4 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer, very fast, no warning, and my daughter was grown and married. I thought, why not? I thought it would be a year, maybe 2. The project expanded. 1 commission became 3. I rented a flat in Leith and started building something I hadn't expected to build, a second life. I'm not ashamed of that. I was a widow in her 60s who had been given an unexpected chance to do work she loved in a beautiful country. I took it. But I called Tessa. I want to be clear about this because people will say I abandoned her, and the truth is more complicated than that. I called every Sunday for the first 2 years. Then the calls became less regular. Not because I stopped caring, because the calls became strange. Tessa was always fine. Always. Every time I asked how she was, she said fine. How's the house? Fine. How's her husband? Fine. Is she still working at the clinic? Yes, fine. Fine, fine, fine. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. I should have heard the blankness in her voice for what it was. But I was far away, and I was busy, and I told myself she was introverted. She'd always been private. She'd call me if something was wrong. She never called. Her husband's name is Shane. I'm going to tell you about Shane. I met him at their wedding. He was charming in the way some men are charming when they want something, big laugh, good with names, always refilling your glass before you'd noticed it was empty. He worked in finance, he said. Private wealth management. He dressed well. He spoke confidently about things he may or may not have understood. I remember thinking he reminded me of a car salesman in a very expensive suit. But Tessa loved him. She was 26 when they married, and she looked at him the way I'd looked at her father, with that particular kind of trust that makes you both brave and very foolish. So, I said nothing. I shook his hand, and I danced at their reception, and I flew back to Edinburgh 3 days later. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, because Tessa would not tell me, was that within 2 years of the wedding, Shane had begun a very careful, very patient process of rearranging her life. It started with her job. He suggested she leave the dental clinic, said her commute was too long, said she was overqualified for administrative work, said he made enough for both of them and she should rest. She quit. Then he suggested they consolidate their finances, one account instead of two, easier to manage. She agreed. Then he suggested that some of the maintenance on the house was getting complicated, and maybe it would be simpler if he handled all of it. The insurance, the property tax, the utilities. She let him. He also had a mother. Shane's mother, I will call her what she was, because she earned the title, was a woman named Gretchen who had moved into the house 3 months after I left for Edinburgh. Just temporarily, Tessa told me, during one of our Sunday calls. She's between places. Gretchen was between places for 11 years. By the time I drove up that driveway, Gretchen had the master bedroom. Gretchen had redecorated the sitting room in colors I would not have chosen. Gretchen had a car parked in my garage, and a standing grocery delivery, and a subscription to a streaming service billed to an account in my daughter's name. And Tessa. Tessa was sleeping in the small room off the kitchen that we'd always used as a study. She had a cot in there, a camping cot, the kind with the folding legs. She had her clothes in a plastic storage bin because there was no closet. She cooked, she cleaned, she did the laundry and the dishes and the weekly scrub of the bathrooms. When Shane had colleagues over for dinner, she served. When Gretchen wanted something from the pharmacy, Tessa went. She did all of this in the house I had bought in 1994, the house I had worked 20 years to pay off, the house I had signed over to her in 2012, just before I left, because I wanted her to feel secure. That transfer of ownership. I need to tell you about that too, because it becomes important later. I had signed the house to Tessa. Her name was on the title. But when I sat down with her in that dim little study, on the camping cot that creaked when we both settled onto it, and I asked her to show me the documents, the property records, the mortgage statements, any paperwork Shane had had her sign over the years. She opened a shoebox she kept under the cot and handed it to me without a word. There were 11 documents in that box. I am not a lawyer, but I have spent 40 years working on commercial projects, and I have signed enough contracts to know what a transfer of interest looks like. Tessa had signed one in 2018. She had signed another in 2020. There was a third document dated 2022 that I had to read 3 times before I understood what it said. Shane had her name off the title. Gradually, document by document, signature by signature, some of them witnessed by Gretchen, which I would later learn creates certain legal complications. He had moved the property into a numbered company that he controlled. Tessa didn't fully understand what she'd signed. She told me he'd said the documents were for tax purposes. Refinancing. Estate planning. She hadn't had a lawyer present. She hadn't asked for one. She had trusted him. I sat on that cot with the shoebox on my lap, and I looked at my daughter, at the dark circles under her eyes and the way she held her own hands in her lap like she was trying to keep them still, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not grief, something older and quieter than either of those things. I had been a landscape architect for 40 years. I understood better than most people that you cannot rush certain kinds of work, that the most important thing when you find damage is not to react, it's to assess. I assessed. I asked her, Did she know the name of the numbered company? She did. Did she still have the original deed from 1994? She did. It was at the bottom of the shoebox, under everything else, creased and soft from handling. Had she spoken to anyone about this? No. Was she afraid of Shane? She looked at the floor and said, "He doesn't hit me," which is not the same thing as no. I told her I needed to make a phone call. I told her to stay in the room and not say anything to anyone. I walked out to the backyard, my backyard with the birch trees I planted in 2001, and I called my lawyer in Vancouver. Her name is Vivienne. I have worked with her for 15 years. I told her I needed her to find me a real estate litigator in Calgary, and I needed it done by morning, and I was going to email her photographs of 11 documents in the next 10 minutes. She said, "I'll call you back in an hour." She called back in 40 minutes. I won't walk you through every legal step that followed, because it took 4 months and involved more paperwork than I have ever seen in my life, including on a heritage park restoration for the Scottish government. What I will tell you is this: the documents Shane had Tessa sign were not as clean as he believed them to be. Several of the witness signatures, Gretchen's signatures, were dated on days when, according to phone records and a credit card statement Tessa had kept without knowing why, Gretchen was not in the province. 2 of the transfer documents had been notarized by a notary whose license had lapsed at the time of signing, and the numbered company Shane had used had been registered using a Calgary address that, when my lawyer checked, turned out to be a UPS store on Macleod Trail. None of it held. I want to tell you about the morning Shane found out. It was a Tuesday in October. The leaves were down and the sky was that particular flat white that Calgary does in November before the snow arrives to make it worse. I was sitting at the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one I'd bought at an estate sale in Kensington in 2003, when Shane came downstairs in his robe. He stopped when he saw me. I had not seen him since the wedding. He was heavier now, in the face particularly, and the big laugh was gone. He looked at me the way people look at something they thought they'd dealt with. "Irene," he said. "Good morning," I said. He looked around the kitchen. Tessa was not in it. She was upstairs with my sister, who had driven down from Red Deer the night before. I had asked Gretchen, the previous day, very politely, to sleep elsewhere. She had not, but that was fine. That was handled separately. "What's going on?" Shane said. I had a folder on the table in front of me. I slid it across to him without standing up. He opened it. I watched his face. The folder contained a court order obtained 3 days earlier, suspending the transfer of any assets connected to the numbered company pending an investigation. It contained a letter from my lawyer to his, outlining the specific deficiencies in each of the 11 documents. It contained a letter from the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams regarding the notary situation, which had evolved into something beyond a civil matter, and it contained a single-page document prepared by my lawyer and already signed by me that outlined the conditions under which the proceedings could be resolved without going to trial. He closed the folder. He said, "I need to talk to my lawyer." I said, "I know. His number is on the last page." He went back upstairs. I made myself a cup of tea. I used my own kettle, the old one with the red handle that Tessa had kept in the back of a cupboard, because Gretchen preferred the new one. I sat down and I drank it while the backyard birch trees did what they do in October, which is stand there and be very patient and very still. There is a moment in landscape work, I think about this often, when the site assessment is complete and the plan is in place and you are waiting for the first crew to arrive. Everything that is going to happen has already been decided. The work hasn't started, but it's inevitable. I've always found that moment very peaceful. That Tuesday morning in my kitchen felt like that moment. The resolution took 4 months. I will give you the shape of it without the tedium of the middle. Shane did not go to trial. His lawyer, to his credit, recognized quickly that the case was going to be expensive and public and very bad for a man whose professional reputation depended on people believing he managed other people's money wisely. He negotiated. The house was restored to Tessa's name, her name only, with a specific legal provision preventing any future transfer without independent legal counsel, and a cooling-off period. Shane agreed to vacate the property within 30 days. As part of the resolution, he also agreed to repay a sum of money. I won't give you the exact figure, but it was substantial, representing funds withdrawn from Tessa's joint accounts between 2016 and 2023. Gretchen left in 3 weeks, not 4. She took the streaming subscription with her. She left the good kettle, which Tessa put back in the front of the cupboard where it belonged. Tessa and Shane divorced. She did not fight it, and neither did he. It was done in 8 months, which is fast, and it cost less than I expected, which is sometimes the way things go when both parties understand that continuing to argue is going to be more painful for one of them than for the other. I stayed in Calgary for 6 months. I slept in the master bedroom, which took 2 weekends to put back the way it was. I still had photographs on my phone from when I'd left, and Tessa and I used them to rehang the pictures and move the furniture back. We painted over the color Gretchen had chosen in the sitting room. We planted things in the backyard that I'd been planning to plant in 2012 before Edinburgh changed my plans. Hostas along the north fence. A serviceberry tree near the shed. 2 varieties of ornamental grass that will look, in a few years, like they've always been there. I am going to tell you the thing I haven't told many people. On the second Sunday I was there, I asked Tessa why she hadn't told me. Not the whole story, I understood the whole story by then, but why she hadn't told me even a fraction of it. Why every phone call had been fine. She thought about it for a long time. We were sitting on the back steps with coffee, and she had her hands wrapped around her mug the way she used to when she was small, and I gave her hot chocolate after school. She said, because I thought you'd come back and fix it, and I thought if you came back to fix it, it would mean I'd failed. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, you didn't fail, you survived. She looked at the serviceberry tree we'd just put in. It was barely 3 feet tall, just a stick with a few roots and some faith. It's not the same thing, she said. No, I said, but it's not nothing either. She's still in the house. She went back to work, not at a dental clinic. She enrolled in an online bookkeeping program through Mount Royal University, which she finished in 11 months. She has 3 clients now, and she's building more. She calls me on Thursdays, not because I asked her to, because she wants to. I went back to Edinburgh in the spring. The Heritage Park project has a 3rd phase starting in September, and I want to see it through. But I bought a return ticket this time, something I'd never done before. Open-ended returns have a way of becoming permanent, and I know that now. I know a lot of things now that I should have known before. I know that fine is not an answer. I know that distance doesn't mean you're not responsible. I know that the most important property I ever owned wasn't the house in Calgary. It was the relationship with the person living in it, and I let 12 years go by thinking someone else was tending it. She told me something else that day on the back steps. She said that when she was at her worst, when she was sleeping on the camping cot and serving dinner to people who treated her like the help in her own home, she used to go into the garage and stand next to my old drafting table, the one I'd left behind because it was too heavy to ship. She said she put her hand on it and just stand there for a while. I asked her why. She said, because it smelled like you, like your office. I needed to remember you were real. I had no words for that. I still don't. Some things you don't try to answer. You just hold them, and you decide that the rest of your life is going to be a response to them. The drafting table is still in the garage. I'm leaving it there. I keep thinking about that shoebox. Tessa had kept it under a camping cot in a room that used to be a study. 11 documents, a faded deed from 1994, and 12 years of silence folded in between. She hadn't shown it to anyone. She hadn't known what it meant. She had just kept it. The way you keep something you don't fully understand but can't bring yourself to throw away. I think about the version of me that almost didn't come home. The version that booked another open-ended return and told herself Tessa was fine because Tessa always said fine. That version of me would have gotten on a plane and gone back to Edinburgh and kept building her second life. And Tessa would have kept scrubbing steps that belonged to her on paper and to someone else in practice. And nobody would have known. That's the part that stays with me. Nobody would have known because we had all agreed without saying so to look away. What Shane did was calculated. It didn't happen overnight. It happened over years, one small document at a time, one quiet erosion of trust layered onto another. That kind of damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, and it depends entirely on the other person not paying attention. He counted on Tessa's trust. He counted on my distance. He built something dishonest out of the space between us, and for a long time it held. But here's what I've come to understand about actions and their consequences. Not in any religious sense, just as a plain fact of how things work, the choices we make don't disappear. They compound. Shane made choices every time he handed my daughter a document and told her it was routine. Gretchen made choices every time she signed her name as a witness from a city she wasn't in. And I made choices every time I accepted fine as an answer and booked another month in Edinburgh. All of those choices were building something. We just didn't know yet what it would look like when it was finished. What finished it was not luck. It was Tessa keeping that shoebox. It was her holding on to the original deed without knowing why. That was a kind of quiet wisdom she didn't get credit for. Not brilliance, not strategy, just an instinct to preserve what mattered even when she didn't have the language to explain why. I think that instinct saved her, as much as anything I did. And the 4 months that followed, the litigation, the paperwork, the careful dismantling of what Shane had constructed, that required something different. It required me to be patient when I wanted to be furious, to be methodical when everything in me wanted to move fast. I had spent 40 years learning that good work takes time, that you cannot rush a foundation, that the most lasting things are the ones built carefully. I had to apply that to the most important project I'd ever been handed. Tessa's building now too, slowly, the way things that last are always built. She has clients. She has Thursdays. She has a serviceberry tree in the backyard that is still just a stick with some roots and a lot of potential. And I have a return ticket for the first time in 12 years. That's what I should have had all along.